Hi there, I'm Beverly Buckley and welcome to The Truth About the Banks in SA. Today I am with Dennis and he's going to be chatting to us a little bit about his experience with the banks and what kind of experience he's had with Advocate Douglas Shaw as well, and all of those kind of wonderful things that we'd like to know about what's happening with our banks and what experiences different people have been having. So Dennis, welcome to the interview. How are you?
Thanks, Beverly. I'm very well, thank you.
Good, glad to have you on.
Lovely to be here.
Yay. So let's start off with your experience of the banks. What's been your story? How did you get involved with this big sort of thing going on that you're currently involved with the banks at the moment in the whole legal kind of situation? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so it's quite a long story, but to put it in short terms, basically a friend of mine's house was taken by Standard Bank about 5 years ago. And I got involved with him through New Economic Rights Alliance to try and help him save his property. Unfortunately, I didn't know what I know today, so I didn't have the experience to be able to actually help him 100%. And unfortunately, the bank eventually managed to take his house. But the way that the whole thing was done, everything was underhand. Nothing was done in an honest way. They used what they call forum shopping, which basically enabled them to take his house in Port Elizabeth while he was stuck up in Johannesburg. He couldn't get down to defend himself. So I was so angry about the fact that he had basically had his house and his property stolen away from him, that I started getting involved and studying what was going on. And then I found out that through Standard Bank, I'd had my bonds with Standard Bank, and then I was offered through SA Home Loans to change over to SA Home Loans. But what I found out at a later stage was that basically SA Home Loans was owned by Standard Bank and one of the huge American banks in America called JP Chase. And that gave me even more of a fright because I'd been reading information on the internet as to just how crooked JP Chase is. It's the biggest criminal enterprise on the planet as far as I can see. They've paid out about 30 billion American dollars over the last 2 years, 30 billion American dollars in fines, bribes, and legal expenses. And I suddenly found out that they were operating in South Africa. So I started studying, and it was very difficult because there wasn't a lot of information available at that time. I had to scrounge every bit of information I could get off the internet. But I stuck to it, and I spent many, many hours a week going through all the information, and eventually started finding out things and asking questions of SA Home Loans. And every day I found things where they were actually lying about stuff. They were contradicting what they were saying to me, and more information was coming in from overseas as to how they, along with the other American banks, had actually caused the financial crash in 2007. And subsequent to that, obviously, a lot more people have lost their houses.
So it's all about trying to get as many houses as possible, maybe.
Well, yeah, they're desperate. It's a situation. It's actually a pyramid scheme that they've been running over there, and the financial system very nearly crashed in 2007, but it was bailed out by the American government and the American taxpayers. But people lost a huge amount, and I'm sure that anybody listening to this broadcast would actually know that they've probably lost about 30 to 40% of the value of their properties and investments and stuff like that. Now that crash was caused by the banks. And then on top of it all, they put people under pressure, and then at the end of the day, they're starting to repossess their properties illegally because the whole system that they're using is completely corrupted.
And how has this affected you now? Where are you in this whole situation at the moment?
Well, I've got a guest house in Port Elizabeth with 3 properties. The 3 properties were bonded by SA Home Loans altogether. They're around about between 2005 and 2007. And we had a very rough time with that financial crash that I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. And what actually happened was we battled to be able to afford to pay the bonds. So I went to SA Home Loans and asked them if they would take a reduced payment, which they did for a couple of months. And then they just told me, no, they're not prepared to do it anymore. They were going to start legal action. Now, that was late in 2011. So I've been fighting these guys basically for 4 years. And it's been very, very difficult because, the legal fraternity in South Africa, to a large extent, are reliant on the banks for a lot of their business, their conveyancing and stuff like that. So unfortunately, the legal representation that I managed to get myself basically, in a lot of instances, didn't have the expertise that was promised. And then secondly, they weren't prepared to fight the banks. So it was quite refreshing when I eventually found out that Douglas Shaw, and I make a joke about it quite often, and I give him a hard time about it. I say to him, it takes a Scotsman to come out to South Africa and take on the South African banks. But at the end of the day, he's the only one that's, if I can put it bluntly, has got the guts to take on the banks to a large extent, because nobody else is. And the press can't do it. He's basically fighting on his own with a small handful of people that are prepared to go all the way to try and help out and change things for investors in South Africa and for people that are losing their properties.
Okay, and then and how is your treatment? I mean, how have the banks treated you? I mean, you said that's been going on for a couple of years now. Have you felt like they've dealt with you fairly at all, or ethically at all, or have they just purely been quite ruthless?
No, Beverly, I'm afraid I've never actually experienced anything like it in my life. Lies, deceit, absolute skullduggery, lying to the court. Everything that you can possibly imagine. In the old days, you used to have respect for the banks because you thought that they were good people and that they had your interests at heart. Everything has been reversed with the way that they treat people when it comes to taking away their properties. So what actually happened with them is once they started legal proceedings, I'd already started asking the questions about securitization. I don't know how much we need to go into that at the moment, but the fact that the banks don't lend you any money, that they, in the case of SA home loans, they get investors to pay for the loans. That it's supposed to be a legal process, which started in America. When they securitize a loan, when you borrow R1 million to buy a house, they don't lend you a cent. They don't even take money out of the petty cash to pay for a cup of coffee. What they do is they take your document, put it into a company which they start called a special purposes vehicle, and then they open it up to investors. And in the South African investing community, people pay money and get certificates into that company. But the problem is that what they're doing is they're not doing it legally. It's supposed to be a true sale. They're supposed to actually sell those documents into that SPV. The SPV is supposed to be completely and utterly independent to protect the investors. And then obviously all the documents should actually be transferred. In other words, the value of the security should be transferred at the deeds office to register the new owners, if you could want to put it that way, the new owners of the debt. But they're not doing that. They're not doing anything of that. They're not selling it to an independent, they're not selling it, they're transferring it, they're seeding it, which is basically not the same thing, to a company which is in their group of companies. I've tracked down all the companies, and all the ones that they've transferred backwards and forwards to are their own companies. So therefore they advertise that they securitize loans, but they're not actually securitizing it. They're using something called a collateralized debt obligation, which is extremely dangerous for South African investors.
Wow.
And when I say South African investors, I'm talking about medical aids, pension funds, provident funds, any investments that are involved with what they call a mortgage-backed security. There's a very, very, very good chance that those investments have got absolutely no security at all, because the SPVs and the assets in that SPV have not been registered at the deeds office.
So they actually don't really exist. It's a kind of a big fantasy.
Well, it is, and it's really scary for South African investors, because if people, there's a lot of people my age and maybe a little bit older that are living on the proceeds of maybe the sale of properties or businesses or something like that, and that money is supposed to survive, to keep them on the go for the rest of their lives. And when the next financial crash comes, and it's to all intents and purposes, it looks like it's going to be very, very shortly, then there's going to be a hanging out to dry of all those investments, and there's a very good possibility that people are going to lose everything. It's a very scary scenario.
Yeah. So okay. Well, one of the reasons why we've actually put these interviews together is for people like yourself that have also been having these kind of experiences. And what kind of assistance have you had from Advocate Douglas Shaw? What certain things have you been doing that's sort of assisted you? What has he been involved in that's assisted you? How has he helped you?
Okay, it's too long a story to go into with the legal assistance that was given to me right from the word go. I was approached by an attorney who professed to be an expert in securitization, and it turned out that this individual I'd basically forgotten what the person had to actually still learn. So what happened was my case was lost. It became such a technical mess that at the end of the day, I lost the case, and I got a judgment against me. So in other words, the judge basically ruled against my case and gave SA Home Loans through another company called Changing Tides. That's another story. The locus standi, in other words, the legal right to sue me, is completely cloaked in smoke and mirrors, because I haven't been sued by SA Home Loans. I've been sued by another company. And that one's supposed to be the sole trustee of the SA Home Loans Guarantee Trust. It's so confusing, I'm not even going to try and go any further. But what actually happened was, after that judgment, I tried to do an appeal on that judgment myself, but I realized that I couldn't go to court. Unfortunately, I'm just one of those type of people. When I go to court, I can't function. It's too nerve-wracking for me. I feel like a fish out of water. So I tried to defend myself, and then I got another lawyer to help me in Port Elizabeth. But unfortunately, the case had already been lost, because through that incompetence of the first attorney, most of my case, the points that I'd made, in other words, the locus standi, whether these people had the legal right to take me to court, and whether the document had or hadn't been sold, in other words, securitization, that had been lost in all the technicalities of the case, which had become so, you could say, demarcade, a complete mess, that eventually the judge decided that I didn't have a defense. So what actually happened was, I got this attorney to try and do it again, but he'd already lost before he even got started, because of the fact that the case had been so badly messed up. I then managed to get hold of Douglas Shaw, and Douglas was great, because he immediately said to me, all right, told me what the situation was in South African law, that everybody has 3 opportunities to be able to appeal a judgment. So I'd already received the judgment against me by the High Court in Port Elizabeth. Then I appealed that, and that appeal was turned down as well by that other attorney. And then when I got hold of Douglas Shaw, I was pretty much sure I was going to lose my properties, because I'd exhausted everything that I thought I would be able to do. But Douglas immediately informed me that there was 2 more appeals that I could actually go through. One was through the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein, and it was quite funny. My wife and myself had to drive through the night on 2 different occasions to shoot up and get the documents put through just in time, and everything was always the last minute. The legal profession seems to work like that, but it's very nerve-wracking at times. But we drove through the night twice to make sure that the documents were served at the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein the next morning, and everything went according to plan. It was great. We had help from another attorney in Bloemfontein to get the documents put through, because there's a special expertise that's necessary there. It's not the same as the High Court. And everything went through fine, and that appeal was also turned down. And Douglas Shaw was very disappointed about that, because funnily enough, there were 2 or 3 other cases which had also gone through for appeal at the same court, at the SCA in Bloem, and those had been granted. So he contested that and sort of said, well, is there something that we can do about asking why that is the situation, why the other people were allowed to do it and not my case? And unfortunately, that was turned down. There's no longer, in South Africa, unfortunately, the legal system doesn't really protect the man in the street. There's a lot of things that happen all over the world that don't happen in South Africa. For example, you've got no recourse against the courts for an attorney who's incompetent. Now, you would think that you would be able to say, okay, I didn't receive, because we've got laws that are supposed to protect us. All the laws, consumer protection laws, there's a whole bunch of them when it comes to properties. It's the Consumer Protection Act, it's the National Credit Act, it's the Home Loans and Disclosure Act, and there's and the Bill of Rights. They all dictate that you have the right to information and that they should give it to you. But unfortunately, you're not protected at all, and it doesn't look like the judicial system is actually supporting us. There's been many court cases where a fair amount of evidence has been put forward, enough evidence for the judges to say, well, all right, maybe there's something going on here, let's do a little bit more research. But unfortunately, there's so many interests tied up with this whole lot here, pensions and government pensions and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, it mostly gets stifled. Anyway, the last thing that Douglas Shaw said to me I could do, and unfortunately I was a little bit tapped out financially, but I could have gone still as a last resort to the Constitutional Court, but that would have cost a lot of money. But at the end of the day, Douglas gave me quite a few months of time to be able to, organize myself a little bit better and keep these guys at bay. So, at the end of the day, I think
sometimes it is about buying yourself a little bit of time just to kind of try and get your head above water, because sometimes it's such a mammoth Goliath person that or entity that you're working with here. It's overwhelming to try and do it yourself. So sometimes you need that bit of time to try and get your head around things. Yes.
Yeah, it did. It definitely did help. And the other thing is that in the 4 years that I've fought the bank, I've always thought that there's a possibility that with that financial crash that I mentioned a little bit earlier, the financial crash is coming. The whole Western world's in so much debt that they can't possibly repay it. And it is going to cause another financial crash, which will be considerably worse than 2007's. And I've been waiting for that, because I know that once the financial system starts unraveling all this pyramid scheme illegalities that have been going on for the last, in America since 1970s, the early 1970s, will come out of the woodwork. But at this particular point, as I said earlier, the judicial system, even in America, is not assisting people. They're getting, the banks have paid out all these fines. Nobody's been prosecuted. Nobody's gone to jail. They've received these huge fines, which the banks pay out of their back pocket out of petty cash. And then they just continue doing it. So now the problem that caused the crash in 2007 is now nearly 50% bigger than it was then. So I'm just holding thumbs that with the delays and everybody, with Douglas's help, a lot of people are going to be in a situation where he's also assisting people to fight the banks, even on their own in some instances. There's a couple of other attorneys that I've been working with that are going for the same way, to try and change the system, that at some stage or other we can make a difference and really start tackling the banks head on.
Yeah, and I think the best thing would be is if we all become like Iceland and we have no more commercial banks, and we can grow from there, because I think that's where we can thrive, when there's no more some entity that's busy suckling energy and life force. It's going to be much better.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Iceland is really how things should be. They locked up the bankers that had caused the problems. And as you say, they were kicked out all the commercial banks. And Iceland was the first country to get back to the same economic situation they were before the crash in 2007. To my knowledge, no other country in Europe has actually done that. So It just does prove that if you can sort these banks out and get some legality back into the way that they do things. Unfortunately, they've got so blasé and so arrogant about what they're doing that they actually don't even care anymore. You ask them, I sent them 6 registered letters asking them for information. I was completely ignored.
So you also didn't get any information from them if you asked for any documents? They didn't give you any of the official legal, like proper blue ink documents that you signed?
I asked in 2011, and they completely ignored me for 3 years. Then around about beginning of last year, I got a notification because the court case was flaring up again, and I was starting to ask even more questions about things, because what had happened is I'd played off the 2 legal departments. They've got their lawyers are in Cape Town and their own legal department is in Durban. So I was playing one off against the other and asking questions and getting them all confused. And then at the end of the day, they said to me that they had the documents, my original document that I signed in Cape Town. So I got in my car on a Sunday and I went down to Cape Town to go and have a look at the documents. When I got there and I phoned them and I said, I'm coming in to have a look at them, they said to me, oh no, the documents are in Port Elizabeth. So I said, well, I don't care, get them down here, because I've driven all the way down here and I want to see these documents. But that was a complete farce, Beverly. It was actually ludicrous, because at the end of the day, what happened was the document that they showed me, the documents, because there's 3 of them, the documents they showed me couldn't possibly have been the originals, because they weren't endorsed with the sessions that were made between these various companies, all within SA Home Loans. Now, there's a thing called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP, which they have to follow, and all those sessions should have been recorded on the original documents. They weren't. So therefore, I had to assume that those weren't the actual original documents. So that's also been going on all the time. They've been lying and conniving and carrying on and getting away with it. So we just have to hope that at some stage something changes.
Yeah, well, I guess the truth is they didn't have the original documents because they sold them.
they sold them, and I have also applied for one of those audits that are done by a guy by the name of Stephen Corrigan in America. He's done thousands of audits over there, chasing down people's debts. What they do with all the interconnection and on the internet these days, and the fact that South Africa is actually a corporation, like Kentucky and like McDonald's. I don't know exactly who owns us at this particular point. It might be Rothschilds, it might be JP Morgan. But at the end of the day, they can track your document down with pinpoint accuracy. There's a farmer up in Grahamstown area who had his document tracked down to a bank in Taiwan. Now he was with Standard Bank, and it's quite a long story, and it's been on Acts Online. He borrowed money because his ostriches got avian flu, so he borrowed 5 million rand, and 6 months later, Standard Bank withdrew the facility. So obviously they knew exactly what was going to happen. He wouldn't be able to repay them the 5 million. And he went and they tried to take his farm, which is probably worth between 50 and 60 million, to pay the 5 million rand loan. And what happened was he paid Corrigan to do this audit, and the audit came out that the bank in Taiwan actually owned his document. So he went into the High Court in Grahamstown and dumped that down on the table and said to them, well, what are you going to do about this? Because this document proves that my loan agreement was sold to this bank in Taiwan. So how did the Standard Bank have the legal right to foreclose on my property? Now that was in May. So it's May, June, July, August, September. There still hasn't been an answer on that case. Now, the judges have got a huge dilemma, because if they, which they should actually do, they should have kicked the case out immediately, because it immediately proves.
Because legally, that's the right thing to do. Legally, you could, it's blatantly obvious, but they're not doing what they should be doing, right?
That's right. They've sold the document. They've been paid out in full. The amount that was paid to them by that bank was 5 million rand. So therefore, in South African law, you have to prove that you've lost something, that you've suffered a loss. How could they possibly prove that they suffered a loss if they were paid out the full 5 million rand that they lent him? Now, there's a lot of technicalities, legal technicalities as to, maybe the bank has got some sort of a claim, but unfortunately that falls through the mat as well because of the way that the whole thing has been done. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a few months now, and the judges cannot make that decision. And this is where things become so interesting. If they do make that decision, every single person that can prove that their document has been sold somewhere in the world will be able to get out of actually losing their property, because it's been paid for already. So at the end of the day, the bank has no legal right to come after you.
Well, let's do this. Let's say that is a definite possibility, and that's going to start happening now. Set our intentions. And those kind of things, because I think that's the way that we're going to get this moving and grooving and shifting things for ourselves and for everyone else.
Well, we're holding thumbs now. These guys have opened a branch in South Africa, this Stephen Corrigan, and they're doing audits in South Africa. And unfortunately, my audit's taking almost twice as long as it should have taken already, because there's so many people that are asking for those audits. But it's going to start. It's a groundswell, and there's going to be more and more people that are prepared to put up that money to go and find that document, track their document down. I believe that mine, because JP Morgan was involved in SA Home Loans, and because I've researched all the little companies that they've got, my gut feel is that my document is being sold in America. And if it comes out that the document has been sold in America, that's the end of their story. They've got no right to have taken me to court. As a matter of fact, they've committed perjury and fraud.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you very much, Dennis, for joining us today. Obviously, I think we've run over a bit of our time, but it was so interesting speaking to you today, and you've brought along so many interesting points and so much valuable information that I think somebody out there is definitely going to look and say, wow, thank you. This is something that's definitely going to be beneficial for me. It was great to chat to you today.
Thanks very much, Bevan. I enjoyed it as well, and I hope it can help somebody out. It's all about helping everybody, trying to help themselves as well. But if we start getting more and more people that can do that, we can give them a run for their money. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Well, you guys have a great afternoon, and we'll chat maybe sometime soon.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Ciao.